All right. We're getting into a conversation this hour. You see it on your screen every time now that you watch the news. You see it when you go for meetings or conferences. You see now an inclusive society when we talk about those who are hard of hearing or those who are deaf. We're looking into sign language interpreters, their role and training. And Helena Sik joins us in the studio this morning, and she's in the hot seat of the Situation Room as a teacher of sign language interpreting. Good morning, Helena.
Good morning. It's nice to be here.
Thank you so much for coming this morning.
Thank you.
Welcome. You obviously teach a different language and not one that is spoken per se. But as we welcome you into the Situation Room this morning, we would like to share a proverb with you from Mozambique. And we would like you to interpret that proverb for us before we get into the conversation. Is that all right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Hopefully I'll understand what you mean.
Let's try.
do not worry. It's not in Portuguese or Mozambican, which I insist is a language. Well, it says, if you fail to be a lizard in your own land, you will fail to be a crocodile in another land.
That was in Swedish Sign Language.
That was in Swedish Sign Language.
She let me tell you, my hip hop culture told me that she's in a gang, and those are the gang signs. But what did you say?
You
Translate
signed
for
that.
us.
What did you say?
You sign?
I translated the meaning of what you were saying in English, because that saying is not equivalent to the meaning in another language. So when you translate between two spoken languages, you have to change a bit and you go for meaning when you translate, right? Because like in English, we say it's raining cats and dogs, but you cannot say the same thing in Swedish, but you say regnet står som spön I backen. It's raining like sticks in the sky. You know, it looks like sticks. So it's the equivalent on the other language.
Okay.
And it's the same between a spoken and a sign language.
Okay.
Sometimes you have to go not for words, you go for meaning.
Okay, so what would be the meaning if you were to tell us that in English? The meaning of what he said, how would you then personalize that message?
Oh, see if I remember it correctly. I would say that if you cannot be if you're not successful in your own country, it's harder to be successful in another country as well.
Absolutely.
Sort of.
True.
There we go.
Well said. And I'm curious, what would be the equivalent proverb or meaning in your language?
In Swedish?
Yes.
I'd say that would be similar to English.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're looking into sign language interpretation, and just give us a background, a little bit of history from your perspective before, we talk about what you do and how. When did now sign language become a part of the languages that were used, whether it's globally, whether it is here, and then we can look through those.
Well, if you mean the Swedish Sign Language in Sweden, it started, I guess, long ago, but it was evolving during the late 1800s in Sweden when the first deaf school was created in Stockholm. And from there, the Deaf Association, the Deaf Movement, was advocating against politicians for making sure that deaf people had full access to society, that they could study, that they could have their schooling. The deaf schools, they wanted them to use sign language in the classroom because all deaf education in Europe at that time were very influenced from a big conference that was held in Milan in 1880, and that sort of destroyed very much for deaf people in general, because all the deaf schools went to the oral method, and they actually thought that they could train their hearing, they could train their speech. So the speech was number one, not the knowledge, the understanding, the communication on the students' behalf. So during the 50s and the 60s, finally, the Swedish government decided to recognize Swedish Sign Language as deaf people's first language. Mm-hmm. And hence, they had to have interpreters, and they have to have schooling. So in 1981, the sign language was actually recognized in the parliament.
Yes.
And afterwards, they also had parallels with starting off with programs for sign language interpreters. Mm-hmm. And those were usually CODAs, that is children of deaf adults, or SODAs. As myself, I had 2 deaf siblings. That's how I learned sign language.
Okay.
And at that time, there weren't not much sign language courses, just short ones. Mm-hmm. So eventually, during the 70s, the profession evolved. And with the recognition of sign language, Swedish Sign Language as deaf's first language, it made it, mandatory. They had to make sure that the deaf schools used sign language in the classroom for deaf children.
Yes.
And hence also deaf adults were available to go to the doctors and anywhere and order a interpreter. And also in 1968 they decided that the interpreter service should be free. So no deaf people pay for their interpreter
in Sweden.
Yeah.
Okay. Why is it called an interpretation? In language, of course, we hear and we speak. That's true, but we are of hearing when we can do that.
Yeah.
Why is it called interpretation for the deaf?
I tell you why. Because research has certified that sign language has its own grammar. It's different from spoken language. You do not follow the grammar of the spoken language. Hence, when you do, like sign language interpreter is, I would say, a little bit more difficult because you do not interpret consecutively. That is, you listen, then you think, and then you translate, and then you produce. When you work as a sign language interpreters, you're listening, you're translating in your head, and you're producing, and you're monitoring what you are producing at the same time. And when you do that, there's another sentence, another sentence. So it's cognitively heavy load to work as a sign language. And you have to differ the word translator and interpreter. A translator has a lot of time, can sit, can read the text, can ponder about what would the best translation be. As an interpreter, you have to work.
You're on the go.
All the time.
So we have alphabets.
Yeah.
Before we had alphabets, we had symbols. There were symbols that represented something else, and you could look at that symbol and you would say this is what it was. Whether there were weights and measures, whether there was money, whatever it was. So that evolved over time into now what a lot of languages use as alphabets. And they were created by people, developed over time, and then as they evolved, they became something else. Does the same process happen in sign language? Are there certain signs that will always mean a certain thing, or as we go, are they then developed into something else? And we know that language is organic. Is sign language organic as well?
Oh wow, that is a very, very complicated, and now it's a long answer. Because way back there had been no research about how the sign language worked. So we know what we know from the 1700 and forward, but I'm sure that sign language was probably one of the first languages on earth before we
spoke.
Before we spoke. Symbols, written language, no. Sign language does not have a written version, but the researcher has evolved different systems for noting, making notes of how the sign language is produced, and that some European countries have a common system, but most have their own, due to the fact that every country has their own sign language. So there's a special notation, but very few actually knows how to write it down, and it takes a long time. So you document everything in video. You sign and you videotape what you're signing, and that is the documentation. But
It's like your textbook.
Yeah, but also deaf people know Swedish. They learn written Swedish and then discuss Swedish text. They go to the university. They take different professions. So they, of course, they know how to write, but you don't write sign language. You write Swedish.
True. Yeah. There's a story that intrigues me. 1980s Nicaragua, where a bunch of kids were put together, and they were trying to be trained, how to speak and to lip read, etc. And then they created their own sign language, which today is called Nicaraguan Sign Language. And the reason why that intrigues me, and perhaps you can explain this to people, that sign language does not have the structure of language as spoken language, right? That a movement and how it's done and your facial expression and where your hand is and the height of the hand speaks different things, and it may look like to us like it's the same thing, and for me that's intriguing. So, and I find most people find it difficult to understand sign language because they want the ABCD of language, they want the intonations of language. But could you explain, and I think it's a beautiful thing, the beauty of the symbolism of sign language? I think American, this means I'm sorry, right? So it doesn't have I am, it does not have sorry, it has one movement over a heart, and it's poetic. It's putting your hand over your heart and moving it in a certain way that visually communicates a more complex thing than words could. Yeah.
Okay, this is going to be long.
Okay.
Yes, please feel very free.
Just like spoken language is linear, right?
Yes.
And the letters come one by one.
Yes, and you have
they
to
are
arrange
connected.
them in a certain context. Yes.
And then you have a flow, a prosody.
Yes.
The way you pronounce words and the way you stress words.
Yes.
All those things are available in sign languages as well.
Yes.
But the sign that you showed me was one of the, we call it iconic signs, because you can figure it out what it means,
and you
right?
can feel it.
Yeah.
Yes.
But there's also a lot of signs that are arbitrary.
Yes.
That is just, this is what we agree upon. If you want to say this, if you want to say the word always in Sweden, you sign. And this is not iconic.
It's not connected
you
to,
cannot understand it if you don't know the language, right? And then there's also, like for instance, finger spelling. You use that when I introduce myself and they don't know me. I always finger spell my name first, and then I show my personal sign. And afterwards, we agree upon you use my personal. Helena.
Yes.
But I first introduce myself.
So when you in terms of a personal sign, just to understand, when you say this, so you sign your name, then you say, "This is my personal sign for Helen."
Yeah.
Amazing.
So, that's my name, so you don't have to finger spell it twice.
Okay. Yeah.
And as an interpreter, you use finger spelling also as a code sometimes to be extra sure that you are understood. Now we're talking about this. Could be a discussion, and perhaps we have gone back and forth, and there's a discussion, and there's 10 people talking. Sometimes I have to address the theme once more, so I might finger spell a little bit more than I do usually, just to make sure we are still on this subject, right?
Yeah.
But there are still. I was going to go back to the facial expressions because I have a very simple phrase that I'm going to show to you. So I'm going to move the mic a little bit. The phrase, the first one is a statement. The other one is a question. And it has the same manual structure, same manual, the place in one sentence you say, are you deaf? You are deaf. Then you change the position of the words, right?
Like you would do with intonation in the spoken word.
But in sign language, this sentence has the same manual movement, exactly the same. If it's a question or a statement, you'll see. I show you.
Oh, wow.
This is the same, but you saw the first one was a question, right?
Yes, it was.
Yes.
Why?
Yeah.
Because my head, and I was doing like
inquisitive.
Yeah.
And then I was nodding my head, you're deaf.
Yes. Yeah.
Now, if I would do it like this, let's say I'm hearing and I don't understand sign language, I do.
Yeah.
The deaf, are you asking me or are you saying I am deaf or,
Yeah.
So you have to be exquisite. All those details have to be synchronized with the manual facial and the way you use the space in front of your body.
Yeah.
So it takes at least, if you study full time, like 25 hours per week.
Per week.
2 years at least to be sort of fluent, not completely fluent, but...
I'm going to ask you to move the mic back.
On the same point, I've seen a lot of music interpretation in a lot of concerts. And you just did the facial expression thing. And that's something that I've always been mesmerized by because I love watching the interpretations. How then do you convey? It's a concert, so it's a very...
I know.
Audio,
we have it in Sweden. I know.
Yes. How do you convey the energy, the feeling, the essence of what's going on, and it's music, right?
First of all, we do not call that interpretation in Sweden.
Oh wow! Okay.
We call that more of. The Swedish word is gestaltning. How do you say that in English? It's like sign language performance.
Okay.
So you interpret the music, you listen to the lyrics, and if you're a deaf interpreter, there are deaf interpreters as well, quite recently now, they either have a hearing sign language interpreter in front of them, but usually they read the lyrics, but some music are very hard to just, it depends. Some deaf people say, I don't enjoy that at all. I just see someone making, expressions, moving their hands. And some say, wow, because perhaps they have a little bit of hearing left. And some people are good enough so they can visualize the music. Yeah. So we don't really call that sign language interpretation. Okay. We call it sign language performance more, so like in art.
So it's an art form of itself, based off of music. But
I would call it that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So would somebody who lived and was interpreting in Kenya, based on this language, then be able to at least get something if they move to Sweden, for example? It's because of language. If I speak French in France, and I speak French in DR Congo, and I speak French in the Comoros, there would be something, even though the culture dictates how language is spoken, but there's the very basic that we would all be able to understand in French.
Yeah.
Is it the same thing for sign language? Would that be the very basic that I would be able to get?
Could be between some Nordic countries, yes, but there's also differences. So I wouldn't say that they would understand everything, but they would probably understand each other better. If you have a Japanese deaf person that went to Sweden, they would probably communicate much easier than a hearing Japanese and a hearing Swede. Why? Because they are used to use your body language, and they mix body language with international signs. And I'm sure you've heard about international. Some people say international sign language, but that's not a language. It's international sign, and they borrow something from the American Sign Language. But I would say, if you know the structure, the modality of a sign language, as a deaf person, and you move to another country, you learn the sign language there much easier and much quicker than a hearing person.
Yes.
That, like, they can study at the university if they have exchange students and they come from the States or the UK, and they study at Stockholm University for 3 months, and then they learn a lot of Swedish Sign Language, and you can communicate with them because they know the code of a signed language, but they have to adapt because it's different.
So my question is, in the world of in the lived experience of someone who lives with deafness, how easy is it for them to integrate with a society when that society does not have a lot of people who know how to sign? This is what I mean. There's the side of we are speaking like we are on this show, and then someone is interpreting. But if someone walks into this room and you're not there, and they communicate by sign, right? How easy or difficult is it for them to convey messages or to even understand what is being done? Because we've had things like, lip reading. Is it a real thing? Is it real science? How easy is it on that other side of life for people to integrate with people who don't sign?
I can only explain what the situation is in Sweden.
Yeah.
I've learned a lot about Kenya, but that's another thing.
Yes.
You have pros that can tell you about that. But in Sweden, deaf people study.
Yeah.
They go to school. They get their primary, secondary school. They learn the Swedish language. They write the Swedish language. They communicate through the mobile phone, computering, digital, social media.
Yeah.
They have their own clubs. They have their own companies. As I said, like hearing people, of course there are obstacles. Yes, of course, because the majority of the population do not sign. But like from the city I'm from, Örebro, it's sort of the capital for deaf people, you can say, because we have the same number of deaf people living there as they have in Stockholm.
Okay.
And Stockholm is 2 million people.
Yes.
My town is 150,000.
Okay.
So that's where the National High School for Deaf are. So many deaf people come to the same city to study and take the high school diploma.
Yeah.
So it has to do with education. And most of them go through the educational system, so they have the tools to communicate with others. And the interpreting services is so well built today that they don't get an interpreter. You know, the funds are restricted, of course.
Yes.
They cannot say, I'd like to go to swim and I'm going to meet someone there and I need an interpreter. No, they're probably going to prioritize other assignments.
Yes, I need to go to the hospital, for example.
But they get interpreters while studying at the university, while studying at the high school if the teacher is not signing, and business meeting at their workplace. There are special funds from the government to companies that hire deaf people, so they can apply for funds from the government. That's a quite a reasonable sum, actually.
Helena Sik is teacher of sign language, and we're looking at sign language interpretation role and training this morning. And just as we went to the break, Helena, talking about then, how is this all adaptable here in Kenya, knowing that from what you've told us so far, that, it's different from country to country. How is this all adaptable here in Kenya?
Yeah, it's different due to the fact that it has, in order to get so many of these things that I have explained that is in place in Sweden, you have to have a government that complies with the need of accessibility for all members of society. That is democracy, to have a voice. So I would say the first step was actually when there were two Swedes here during the 80s, in 1986, Birgitta and Uldis Ossolins. They was here for 5 years, and they helped the Deaf Association to establish the Deaf Association in Kenya. And they also had ambition at the Nairobi University, where there still is a researcher. He's still there. The purpose was because it was funded by the Swedish International Disabilities Act. They had funding for that project for 5 years. And they also sent a lot of money to the university to make sure that they used the money the way it was supposed to use. But unfortunately, some money just didn't work the way it should have been. Anyways, I think you would have to. The good thing is that Kenyan Sign Language was recognized, so it was put in the law that the news had to be interpreted in sign language. That was a good step, but unfortunately, there are so many sign language interpreters doing the work on air that are not qualified. They are not educated enough, and they have. My impression is that they've gotten the job through contacts or not due to the fact that they are trained or accepted by the deaf community. And there's also another question that I have been addressing, and I have realized that the interpreter has to work together with the deaf community. They have to join each other and advocate for the same purpose. So I think that the deaf community needs to strengthen their voice and put forward that, hello, we have a law, and that is not just it's not just the news that has to be interpreted. We need an interpreter when we go to the doctor's office. We need an interpreter when I meet people and I go to authorities that have a great impact on my life as a human being. It has to do with human rights. And the funny thing is, it's quite, it's sort of a paradox that they have news. That's great. But they don't have the everyday life that they need to make a living or to get a job.
Yeah. Just a quick question. You mentioned it quite quickly. You talked about the interpreters that we have on TV now. And the question I have from what you said, is the quality of interpreting good enough for the audience that it needs to arrive to? Or do you think that the Kenyan news interpretation cycle and the people working in it need improvement?
Oh, yes, they need improvement, because the information I get is from deaf.
Yes.
When deaf people say, that interpreter is good, but that interpreter uses a sign language that I don't recognize, made up signs. You know what happened at Nelson Mandela's funeral?
That was going to bring that example.
So it still happens in this country. Oh my!
And there's so many broadcasting companies in your country.
Yes.
And I get information through my contacts here.
Yeah.
And I know that if you take all the 200 interpreters that might be available, perhaps 20 of them is okay.
10%.
Why so?
Well, you tell me.
It's the world in which you operate in.
There's no sign language. There's not enough sign language courses. They're too short. There's a lack of communication between the deaf community and authorities and the interpretation. The interpreter as a group, like look at Uganda, they have done a lot of progress. They are now beginning to have master level on the program. And what Sylvia has done here in Kenya is astonishing. She has been able, since she was in Sweden last year, for 10 months, they have been working on producing or arranging a pilot program for sign language interpreters. And I said, head for those that you see, this one will be a good one, because they have good enough sign language skills. So you have to pick the students. If you have a short program, they cannot be not fluent. And the problem is that there are different, as I understand it, there are also different tribes and they have different dialects or way of saying things. Yeah, sure, but you need to document all the signs. And that I thought what was going to happen at the Nairobi University. If they had used the money and videotaped the signs, they can produce what we have a digital dictionary that is really wide, and other countries have too. So everything has to be videotaped and documented and say this is the Kenyan Sign Language in general. Then there could be varieties, but if you have a sort of a hub that everyone can connect to, and the interpreters can also enhance their sign language skills looking into that dictionary. So that is needed. Research is needed, documentation of the research, more sign language courses, and a longer sign language interpretation program.
So Kenya has a School of the Deaf, a number of them.
Yeah.
And are we essentially saying that the sign language that is spoken or that is used across these schools, there's no standard, or are we saying that there's no,
I cannot claim that because I don't know, but I'm sure I heard Sylvia was talking to Janice. I would suggest that you would invite Sylvia and have an interview with her because she knows the landscape when it comes to that. So that's not for me to answer that question when it comes to Kenya.
Yeah, just a quick question. From your experience, because now I'm thinking about standardization, I'm thinking about vetting of interpreters, I'm thinking of continuous training on it. And then you said something very important as well about the interpreters being part of the community so that they can understand the nuances that develop as well. In your experience, how do the Swedish ensure that the people who become interpreters are doing all of these things? Are they assessed on a regular basis? Do they need to refresh their courses? Are they integral to the deaf community?
Two things. The program today is a 4-year program, right? So they study sign language for 2 years, and then interpretation for 2 years, and then they go out on, and they also have an internship during the training. Of course.
That's 4 years.
Yes. Altogether 4 years, and these programs right now are held at 2 folk high schools. Our school is one of them, and then the 3-year program is held at Stockholm University as a bachelor. So they're more focused on further, research. So that's good. There's an academic path that you can take. Or if you're a practitioner, you want to be a practitioner, usually they choose our school because then you know that I will be working full-time and employed as a sign language interpreters. There are approximately 550 employed sign language interpreters in Sweden, and perhaps an additional 200 that works on hours. So they're freelance. And it's paid by public money, tax money, pays for every single hour that an interpreters do. No private person pays for the interpreter. And I would say to enhance further training, yes, we have courses for educated interpreters that has been out there for a few years. We have, for instance, one course that is specialized in judicial interpreting in the court. We have one course for those who wants to go deeper into healthcare when it comes to mental health. So that course is a 7-day course where they look into psychiatric ward, and you have meetings with a psychiatrist that has a client that is deaf. And usually the psychiatrists have different tests that they do. And if you, as an interpreter, don't know about this test, it's very important that you have insight in what you are interpreting. That way, it's easier to do the correct interpreting and understanding what is happening. So that course is very popular. We've had it running for 7 years, I think, and it's given every term. So twice a year we give that course
here
for trained interpreters, and then we have another course for guidance and deaf-blind interpreting. Yeah, I forgot to tell you, we don't just train sign language interpreters. They also become interpreters for people with deaf blindness. So they have to learn the tactile sign language and all the methods that are, special for that kind of the consumers.
Okay.
Let me give you a hint. Do you know how long the average course for sign language interpreters in Kenya is?
Do tell.
3 months.
Yeah.
Now you can ask your question.
The criminal justice system also asks questions about how they then are able to go through this, because we do have a number of cases whereby in the system there are different terms, there are different phrases, and the kind of support that they could get for sign language interpreters. Does that come under some of the training or courses that you do?
You're talking about in court?
In court, with police, with...
Yes, we have a basic course within the 4-year program, but then there's the additional. So if you want to be a court interpreter, we also have a system in Sweden that is held by one of the... it's called collegium. It was from way back during the 16th century when we had a king called Gustav Vasa. We had 11 of them. Today there's only 2 left. One of them is handling commerce and so forth, and the second one is handling authorization of interpreters. So I'm actually in the board of assessors. So if you work as an interpreter and you are trained, you don't have to authorize yourself, but it'll give you perhaps an extra status, and that is valid for 5 years. So you are set up with some role players, and then you enter the room and you are monitored and you are videotaped, and then we assess it whether the Kammarkollegiet, will they certify you or not. Or we call it authorized, because you're still certified in the way that you have a certificate from the training program. But this is the next step, the next level. And you can also be certified as a court interpreter. And that is a higher, much tougher test. You have to pass the written theory test first.
Yeah.
So most of the court interpreters study the judicial systems and the laws and so forth, and then they go for the authorization in court interpreting.
Okay. So who's taking up these courses here?
No one, I don't know. You have to ask Sylvia. but I can say Sylvia contacted me through an email in 2023 in August, and she said, please, can you help us with this? We are looking for how to set up an interpretation program.
So are you setting that up? And that's the question in terms of how you're setting that up now, if that's the case.
No, we are not setting it up. They are. So there was a trio that took the course in Sweden last year, and they have been working really hard. So they had a pilot program it's only a month. It's 4 sessions. They had interpreters coming to their office, and they give them training in they know sign yes, of course, that's important. Then they know sign language already, so they're taught in ethics, also some sign language role playing, that is interpreting, and also deaf studies. That is a deaf teacher, Joseph Ityang. He's one of the 3 that came to Sweden. And then the third one, Caleb, is a professor at Strathmore University. And he has been doing a lot of work during this year. So the conference that we are held, that Hali Halisi has organized, that is Sylvia's company, together with Joseph. And she has been cooperating with Uganda, Maureen. They are setting up this pilot program now, and the objective is, of course, is to enhance it and make it longer and so forth. And I said, choose those that you really believe in, that you see they are skilled enough, and in the future they might be the interpreter trainers that is going to train others.
I have a quick question, and now I'm thinking about the workplace. Someone that was born deaf, has gone through school, has learned etc. In Kenya, I rarely see them in traditional working environments. It's not quite common, and I think we've done not much justice in that area, if I'm honest, and people living with disabilities in general. In your experience, when someone is looking for a job or gets a job, what support do they need in order to be able to be effective? I know that they can write, they can do all of those things, but there are so many more things that those of us who can hear that take for granted. Do they need special support in their workplaces, or how does it work?
I think that if you as a deaf person has another disability, you might need an assistant or so. Otherwise, you do the work the way hearing does, but you have special technical devices perhaps, and you have interpreters when you have a business meeting.
Okay.
And you use all the digital platforms that we use to communicate, mail, text messages, WhatsApp, and every those things that because today, to be honest, it's very seldom that we put the number on the phone and call someone. We as hearing people don't do that. We send them text message, short. We talk to our relatives, our family, and they have video calls. They just put it on and then they sign to each other.
Okay.
And like, for instance, go back to my hometown, Örebro. There are 30,000 people in Örebro who know sign language more or less.
Yes.
Out of 150. That has to do with people, meeting them in this. For us, it's nothing odd.
Okay. All right. That's interesting. My final question to you is, as you come to Kenya and you've seen and you've experienced, what are some of the things that you as a person would like to see Kenya do better at? You've talked about the interpreters and the quality of them, but what are the other things that you think Kenya needs to do?
I think that the interpreter as a group has to join, because what I have been given is that every interpreter works for themselves. No, this is my job, don't come here, instead of calling up each other. Hello, let's talk, let's discuss through this common association, and let's get in contact with the deaf community. What can we do together? Because there's a bill now that I have understood. I don't know all the details, but there's a bill that has been up in the parliament for over a year, I think, and it's been postponed, and there are things that are done for disabled groups, sitting in a wheelchair, blah, 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 but nothing for the deaf. And it seems like they are putting the deaf on the side when it comes to, like, they are not together with all the rest. And I said, get strengthened together as a group. Talk to people with deaf blindness, talk to the hearing impaired, make an organization and advocate together. Then you get muscles. And you have to do it together, because the interpreter role, if we speak about we haven't talked about that yet, is supposed to be impartial. Because when I go to the doctors, I'm the doctor's interpreters as well as the deaf person. And today we talk about interpreting as a part of an interaction, which means that before the interpreter was sort of outside, and I'm just the interpreter, didn't introduce herself, which is quite odd. So I need the help of both parties when I interpret. I have to sometimes interrupt. Excuse me, can you please repeat? You said that ABC. Okay, fine, thank you. And then I go on. And sometimes I have to interrupt the deaf person if I do not understand correctly. I cannot cheat and just, look, I'm doing this perfectly. I'm missing a lot of things. I just skip that. They didn't give me time enough. You know, you have to secure the information value of what is said. And when I go out from a meeting, if they said, oh, I forgot all about you. Good, I say. Then I have succeeded.
I've done my job.
Because you have met. You had a discussion and you forgot about me.
We should not remember like we remember the Mandela one.
First, I was so glad because I saw, oh, he's on full screen, you know. Wow. And then I saw, but wait a minute.
What is he saying?
I don't know South African Sign Language, but I know sign language. And he was doing the same sign all the time. I cannot believe this. And it was so sad because all the deaf communities all over the world
were watching.
Were so upset.
And they were missing out on something.
Yeah, but also it was him. He's an icon in so many countries.
Yeah. Have we gotten to the point, or is it starting at where we're saying it should be a requirement that in each industry, whether we're looking at health, where there are doctors involved, whether we're in the supermarket, whether we are in school, that there should be interpreters on the payroll, essentially, who are helping folks? Have we gotten to that point?
Yeah, or an agency or a government agency that is run by the public. We have both in Sweden. We have private agencies and we also have a public sign language interpretation agency in each county in Sweden.
So what does that agency do essentially?
Oh, just make sure that the people call and they want to book an interpreter for a meeting at a working place and they arrange for that. Like, for instance, our school, not all people in our school are signing. So we use interpreters quite frequently, all the time when we have meetings. So I would say we have it practically every day.
Yeah.
There's always some meeting going on.
Yeah.
And they come from the agency. They have the same administration as us because we are run by we're a public folk high school.
Yeah.
The majority of the folk high schools are run by different, movements. It could be churches, it could be some sort of study companies, different from, but usually Sweden is famous for their many associations of different kinds. That is changing too now, but still.
What should it look like? I mean, you're here.
Yeah.
You have insights. You've seen what the situation. What should it look like in a progressive society where we're taking into consideration everybody?
I would love to see some school or university take the responsibility of administrating. And we have been visiting Strathmore. We have been visiting University of Nairobi. And our personal impression is that Strathmore has a vision.
Yeah.
They have a plan how to move forward. They have thoughts about, how do we structure a sign language program and how do we structure a sign language interpretation program. So through Caleb and his staff, we realize that this will probably be the road to success.
Right.
Because they are ready to put in the effort and the money by themselves.
I hear you.
Not because I don't believe in, we can help with our knowledge, but you have to build your own muscles, your own wealth. Because if we come and we teach and we conform, no,
it's not the same. So there's a conference that ends today, though, but it's bringing African Sign Language.
That's the first African media sign language interpreter, and that's also a little bit strange for us. What media? But then I understand why, because that's where it all began. So it has to do with angles.
I'm sure.
And I showed a few clips at the conference from the Swedish television, where I knew a few interpreters that work there. And, the interpreter is on half the screen is the interpreter.
Yeah.
So the conclusion at the conference was that we have to advocate for a larger picture because it's a visual language.
Sure.
And I've seen some of the broadcasting with the
It's a little in the corner.
It's almost impossible to see.
see.
You cannot see the non-manual signals, the grammar of the language. And it's even worse if the interpreter doesn't really
understand
or can perform.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, definitely great insights, and thank you for being here and doing that explainer for us and for us to grasp this on a greater level. Helena Sik is a teacher of sign language interpreting at the Fellingsbro FHSK Folk High School in Sweden, and she's been our guest this hour. Thank you so much for doing that.
Thank you very much for having me.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.